Steve. Thanks for having me, and I'm pleased to be here. It's kind of strange to be presenting to an empty room, but I'm really pleased to be here and to talk to you about this impressively entitled presentation, The Changing Face of Choral Recording and Distribution. A little bit of background about Octarium. We are a choir of 8, and we argue sometimes on whether we're a choir or whether we're a vocal ensemble or whether we're a chamber ensemble of voices. I know groups like Chanticleer call themselves an orchestra of voices, but since we're only 8, sometimes we joke that we're a chamber ensemble of voices. But the upshot is we are a small vocal ensemble. 4 men, 4 women. We are co-ed. I do not conduct in performance, so when you come to an Octarium concert, you get them, and so there's no conductor's back between you and the singers. We were founded in 2003, and I was at that point at a church in Kansas City, Missouri, where I am now. And this was back in the early 2000s, so churches still had budgets way back then. And I had a wonderful budget that paid for 8 section leaders for me to have in my larger chancel choir. So I went over to KU and stood outside Simon Carrington's choir room and started pointing at people and saying, I want you to come sing for me at my church. And I found 8 really fantastic singers. And once I had them in the building, I thought, you know, it's just a waste to have them as section leaders. Let's make a little choir out of you guys. And so I did that, and it was really, really, really fine and just kept getting better as we worked some more. And so in 2003, not knowing anything about the nonprofit arts, not knowing anything about board governance or 501c3 filing or taxes or any of those things I've now learned about, I said, hey, I'm going to start a nonprofit choral group. And so our first season was 2003, 2004, and so we're now entering our 10th season. We recorded, our first CD was released in 2006, so we recorded it in 2005. And many people ask me why I recorded. And the reason why I started to record is exactly the reason for this webinar. And it's gotten more and more important as time has gone on. I said our debut CD was recorded in 2005. And if you can recall way back then, at that point you probably didn't have an iPod or an MP3 player. You probably had like a Sony Discman. And so to record something, you took your Discman in and you had a little disc you put in, you set up a microphone, and you had to press record. But now people can just pull their phones out of their pockets and press record. And then even worse, or even better, depending on your perspective, you can then throw the recording into an app, and you can auto-tune it, or you can throw it into an app, and then some other app will tell you what song it is, or you can immediately mix it into something different, or add a drum beat or a saxophone track or whatever. So in this day and age, where we are carrying little mini recording studios in our back pockets, it is even more important for us to be very, very careful and very, very thoughtful about the official recordings we produce. You go to your old college library and you dig out those really, really old records, and sometimes they're really, really bad, but they're the only things we have because nobody recorded back then. And now everybody's recording all the time, and you can find everything on YouTube. And 78% of the things on YouTube are awful, but then once in a while there's something really, really amazing there. And so we need to, hey, look, I'm supposed to be presenting a webinar. I think you guys can see that. So we need to be really careful about how we record and how we distribute, because we want to make sure what we're giving our public matches what our mission is. So this webinar is designed to talk about that, to talk about the philosophy of recording, to talk about the basics of the recording process. I'm not going to delve really far into that because engineering and setup is something that is kind of a personal thing. You know, everybody has a different opinion on how it should go. I will tell you what I've done with our 4 Octarium albums, however. And then I'll also delve into the mechanical rights and digital rights issues, the licensing issues, options for distribution, and creating a physical CD product and a digital CD product. So the first thing here is that I read an article in the New Yorker. It was kind of kismet. This showed up in February of this year. And it's a pianist named Jeremy Denk, and he was recording the Concord Sonata by Charles Ives. And he wrote a fantastic article that I've pulled a lot of quotes from today. The quote is, "Recording is a way to be visible, a way to escape the fleetingness of performance and to reach people who will never hear you in concert. You know, that's why we record. But it's also a perverse transaction. In exchange for a considerable sum, you receive many, many hours of narcissistic suffering." And that's really true. If any of you have ever recorded, you know, you walk in that first day and it's petrifying, and the microphones are all there, and you know, suddenly the stakes are really high, and you think, oh, what if it's not perfect? But ironically, it doesn't have to be perfect when you record, because you can just press stop and press record again. It should be more nerve-wracking to sing in front of a live audience, because that's the one shot you get, and that live audience will only hear it once. When you're recording, you can always stop and say, oh, I didn't like that, let's do it again. When you do that too much, and you start to spend a lot more money than you would otherwise. But it's always been funny to me that I get more nervous when I record than when I'm singing live, which is kind of a flip-flop thing to do. So you want to record. Octarium, we were singing some great live performances. We had done one sampler CD, which I'll talk a little bit about later, where a sound engineer loved what we did and just said, hey, I'll record you guys for free just to see what's happening. And we spent 2.5 hours in a really wonderful church venue, and we put out some Christmas music. I'll talk about that later. We'd done that, and then I thought, I need to raise money to record. But how am I going to do that? So I partnered with another entity in town, and we were going to do this together. And we were each supposed to raise $5,000 to do it. And they did not raise the money, but I did. So suddenly I had $5,000, which was a huge sum of money at that point. And I thought, okay, let's just do it. We're just going to record. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to go in there and I'm going to record. So I called those sound engineers and I said, we're going to do it, we're going to record. So I brought my group in, and the theme of the album was, here are some songs that we know we can sing and record really well. That's not what we called it. We called it the debut album, but it should have been music we know we can sing with $5,000 to spend on the recording process. So this debut album was recorded in 2005. It was released in 2006. It took me a year to really figure out what I was doing with the editing and the mixing process and with the engineering portions of it. But the philosophy of it, and this is important, was that I wanted it to be as much like a live performance as possible. So the equipment we used, and I am not a sound engineer, so I don't know exactly what type of microphones we had, although I could find that out if anybody's interested. But that we were in a large cathedral-type space, and we were set up as if we were singing a concert, and then halfway down the center aisle were these two microphones set up. Much like you would see if somebody's recording something for archival purposes or for live broadcast on the radio. So when we got done with that, I did some basic editing. I didn't do much, just basics. And the takes we did as we were recording consisted of full renditions of songs. We didn't do stop-starts. We did complete full renditions. So we would sing If You Love Me by Thomas Tallis 6 times, and then I would look for the best chunks. And so the edits in there are big chunks. So like one verse I took from one take, and another verse I took from another take, and there are very few edits. And this is a little bit of what that album sounds like. My equipment here is a little bit primitive, so what I'm doing, just so you know, is I'm playing my iPod on one of those little speakers rings, and then it's coming through the microphone I'm talking through. So it's not the best quality of sound. If you really want to hear what we sound like, look us up online. But this is a little bit of Music's Empire by Boyd Fouch. It's the bestseller off of our debut album. So I don't know if you can get the idea of that, but it is a very protected sound. The mics are way back, so you don't get singers right in your face. You get the sound of the room as well. And we were in a fantastic room I call Visitation Church here in Kansas City. I often call it our ninth singer. We've recorded everything we've recorded there. It makes the singers comfortable. It makes them happy. It makes them able to sing out and sing proud. So that's the first album. We did it in a space, and we recorded the space, and recorded the space and the singers as one cohesive whole. In 2007, we released a Christmas album called ODA. I didn't sample it for you guys here because it's very similar to the Red album in philosophy. We put 2 microphones in the space and we sang a bunch of Christmas music that we already knew, so we did full takes, and it was the same thing. It was just Christmas music. The next album after that we called Essentials. And what happened is I looked at the sales for ODA, and I looked at the sales for the debut album, and I saw that the things that were selling best were the things that high school choirs were singing. And so a kid would go into a high school choir and they'd sing Boy Crouch's Music's Empire, and then they'd come home and they'd download it. And so I thought, well, that's what I need to do. I need to release an album of what we consider to be the essentials of choral music. So I went through a list and I did a lot of research on what I thought people were singing, and I released this album in 2008. Because about half of it was music we hadn't sung much, we recorded it a little bit differently because we could not really do at that point cohesive full takes from top to bottom on music that we hadn't lived with like we had lived with the music that was on our first and second album. So we started to do our recording process a little bit differently, doing little pieces, parts, little 40-second snippets here and there, and then I would weave that all together. We had my same venue, Visitation Catholic Church. We had microphones placed all over the venue, but what we ended up doing was mixing from the set of microphones that was closest to the singers, and then we were going to add in the ambient sound from the faraway microphones after that. So we had a really nice product with the close-up mics, and then when we added in the ambient sound, it was a disaster. It was horrible. It was just a muddy mess, and so there was a good 3.5 hours where I thought the project was crap. And then my sound engineer, God bless him, said, hey, let's just add some manufactured reverb to this. And he pushed a button, and boom, there it was. And I thought, is that legal? Can we do that? And we can, and we did. So this is a little snippet from Essentials. Again, it's not engineered at all, except in the sense that some of the reverb that we added back in was manufactured reverb, which is ironic considering that the space we were in has such a wonderful natural reverb of itself, but it just didn't work for some reason with the way we had the microphone set up. The best seller off of this album is Daniel Gothrop's Sing Me to Heaven, so here's a little bit of that. And my soul finds paradise, So that's that. If you want a little bit more of that, you can visit us online and download that for yourself. The ironic thing about that is if you listen on good speakers and you compare the Red album, which is all natural, with the Green album, which has manufactured reverb added back into it, the difference is, to my ears, negligible. I can't really tell that that happened. I'm sure there are people in the world that could tell. I'm not one of those people. So that was that album. So the next album we released, Steve in his introduction talked about that I have recently completed kind of a local composers initiative to use my local composers to create music that we would sing. That idea came out of this album called Modern Masters. And I just contacted a bunch of living composers, Eric Whitaker, Morton Lordson, Libby Larson, Stephen Stuckey, Mark Adamo, and I said, hey, you guys, what do you want Octarian to sing? We're doing an album. What do you want us to sing? And they each got back to me with pieces that they thought were representative of their great work, but that were less well represented in the recording canon than they'd like. And because it was modern, and because it was living composers, and because the music they all chose for us to sing was mostly tonal but still had that edge that modern music tends to have, I decided to go a little rogue on this project. So what we did was individual microphones in front of each singer. We were still in a large Visitation Catholic space, so we still had that wonderful natural ambiance of the room. We still had those microphones placed all around the room like we had for Essentials, but each singer had his or her own mic. There's a little picture here of them set up to do that. So you can see here that there's not baffles set up between them, so they're still singing as an ensemble. They're still all within visual distance. They're still thinking of choral blend, but they each have their own microphone. So what this ended up giving me was a much more intimate sound and a little bit more control, so that if one of my basses, my two basses are here in the middle on the left side of the picture, if Brady, who is closest to the right, sings too loud, I can pull him down a little bit. But because we have no baffles, you can hear a little bit of Ben, who is the other bass in Brady's microphone. You can also hear a lot of Andrea, who is the redheaded alto on Brady's right in Brady's microphone. So I had some measure of control with each singer, but I didn't have a ton of control, and I didn't have, I couldn't completely edit. And so the sound I ended up getting, I really like. It's poppy. And it has disturbed a lot of people. And if Steve, Daniel, one of his pieces is on the CD, and a lot of people do not like the CD at all. They don't like how immediate it is. They don't like the closeness of the sound. It sounds like you're right next to the singers, so you're not really getting choral blend from afar. You're getting what it might sound like if you were standing up there with the singers, which is one of the reasons I like it so much. But people don't like it. Sales are an indication. This album has not sold well. It could be because of the repertoire on it, but it also could be because of the quality of sound, because it's a completely different. We've gone a little bit more towards a modern style of recording, but we've meshed it with the traditional style of here we are in this big cathedral space. So this is a little bit of what that sounds like. This is A Boy and a Girl by Eric Whitacre. Here we go. When the singers first heard that, they were shocked. They were appalled. They said they felt naked. They had been used to the other sound that we get, which is a very safe sound, a very covered with velvet sound. But then the more they listened to it, the more they liked it. And so, on my iPod, things go back and forth. So once in a while, something from the Essentials album will play, followed immediately by Modern Masters, and it's a jarring change. But then if something from Modern Masters plays first and Essentials or the Red album comes on after that, it's like, where did they go? They're behind that velvet curtain. I can't hear them anymore. Octarian, where are you? And so it was an interesting experiment. I don't know whether it was a successful one, but it certainly proved a point that people are very kind of stuck in their ways on what choral recordings ought to sound like. And if you want to do an ensemble, the ensemble should be created with the people, not with the engineering. And so the mics should be far away so that the sound has a chance to become one as it comes out of the singer's mouths and then be captured by the mic as one once it's cohesive together, not be captured in a close mic to become one later in the studio. But the progression keeps going. The CD that's in process is a pop CD. Steve talked about in the introduction, this should have been choral repertoire. We do that is music that we think should have been choral. Most of it's pop music. We do some classical covers. And you can see here in the picture, we're in studio, and there's baffles in between them. And so this is a challenge for my singers because their whole job, their whole artistic life is about blending with each other and creating music together. And their job here in the studio is to sing accurately and in tune by themselves and let us handle the mixing in the room. And that's been very hard for them, and an adjustment that I knew we would have to make, that they've made beautifully, but it still has been quite an adjustment. So it's going to be heavy on editing and engineering. It's a pop CD. And it's not going to sound anything like anything else we've ever done. And I do have a little bit of, this is an it's mixed. Well, it's edited. It's not really mixed. So it's one of the pieces that will be on the album. There's a lot I still need to do with it. I need to pull the solo up. I need to put the backgrounds down a little bit. But this is a little bit of how Octarium sings Proud Mary. So that's how we do Proud Mary. So it's a path that I've taken. I didn't plan to take this path when I released the first album in 2006. I didn't think, okay, I'm going to progressively get more engineered as I go. It's just something that has happened, and it doesn't mean that I'm going to keep progressively getting more engineered. I think probably the next album we do will be a traditional choral album with traditional pieces on it, recorded in a traditional way. But I do like to press the edges of what people think choral music is, and this CD, particularly in Modern Masters, also are pressing the edges of what people think choral music ought to be. So, is it live or is it Memorex? You guys are probably not old enough, or maybe you are, to remember there was this ad campaign in the late 80s, early 90s, this guy with sunglasses, this 80s dude sitting in a chair and just being blown away by the music that was coming at him off of his cassette tape on his stereo. So this is again a quote from Jeremy Denk in that article in the New Yorker. And so he's done recording and he's in studio with his engineer. And he says, I notice a problem. There are a few notes that come too late. And the comedy of the passage depends on quicksilver timing. I can make that note sooner, Adam says, like a doctor offering up a prescription. And I look at him disbelieving. With a click of a mouse, he deletes a microsecond or two, and the timing is perfect. Surely this is cheating. But no, Adam disagrees. And he says, this is the great possibility and joy of recording. And that's, it's the same idea I got when my sound engineer said, oh, I can put manufactured reverb in there. And I said, that's cheating. Isn't that cheating? And no, it's not cheating necessarily, as long as they're not pretending that it's real. Does that make sense? But then how do you tell the people that are listening to your recording what's engineered, what's not? And what do you do when what you've engineered is so much better than what you could ever sing live? Which thankfully doesn't happen to Octarium very often, but it happens to a lot of other groups, and more particularly in pop music. There's a completely engineered album, and then you hear the person live, and you're thinking, there's no talent here. What's happening here? So sound engineering is a difficult tightrope to walk. At the beginning of this webinar, I talked about the sampler CD that a sound engineer loved what we did and said, I'll give you 3 hours of recording time. And so we just ran into Visitation and sang 3 hours worth of Christmas music and ran out again. And one of the things that we sang at that point in our repertoire was Benjamin Britten's Hymn to a Virgin. You'll see the score here on your screen. It's scored for double chorus. And larger choirs do, the large choir singing chorus 1, and then a smaller group of 4 or 8 or 16, depending on the bigness of chorus 1, somewhere off in the distance singing chorus 2. And we did it, but it was never as successful for us as it is for a larger choir because it's 4 and 4. There's no way chorus 2 can actually be smaller. But in this recording, in this 3 hours we had, we couldn't get the right kind of distance, we couldn't get the right kind of mic setup to really record it. So I said, okay, let's just trash it. And my engineer said, no, here's what we're going to do. You're going to have your whole group sing chorus 1, and then you're going to have your chorus 2 sing by itself. So the whole group will sing chorus 1, and then we'll do a different take with chorus 2 singing in time, and then we'll patch it together in the studio. And my eyes got really wide, and I thought that we can do that. And he said, yeah, as long as you can duck, and as long as we've got the timing, we've got kind of a click track or a mental click track to go on, we can put it together. So I said, okay, let's try it. And we did it. And this is how it sounds. And it goes on like that. Now, is that cheating? Well, kind of. Is that a good performance? Well, maybe, maybe not. What is that performance missing? Well, it's missing a lot. It's missing the idea that choir 1 knows what choir 2 is doing. It's missing the idea that they're working together as a cohesive unit and making eye contact with each other and creating music together. What it becomes to my ear is a very accurate rendition of this piece without a lot of heart. And so that's the danger of being enamored by the possibilities of recording, is that you're going to get a lot of engineering perfection and not a lot of heart. So as Jeremy Denk says, the natural flow of things is vanishing, replaced by this emerging construct. I think about how precious live performance is and how terrible it is that more and more performances sound like recordings rather than the other way around. And a great example of this is on that same sampler CD we recorded Morton Lauridsen's O Magnum. And there's a lot of problems with this recording. There's some tuning issues. There are ensemble issues where they don't quite sing together. But as a piece of live music, it is one of my favorite things that Auditorium has ever done. There is so much about this piece that I love. I'm going to play you a little snippet of it. And again, you're hearing through the computer microphone what my iPod is playing on circular speakers, so you're not really getting a good idea of what it sounds like. But here is a, for all intents and purposes, live recording of parts of the O Magnum Mysterium by Lauridsen. So that's a little bit of live. And so then we come to our ODA album several years later, and I said, you know what, I want to do a recording of O Magnum Mysterium, and I want to fix all the things that were wrong in the first piece, first recording we have, and then do everything we did right. I'm trying to find this spot here, and I'm messing up with my technology. And that was a silly thing for me to expect to be able to do, because how can I possibly get everything right that we did right in that recording and fix all the things that were wrong? So I spent a lot of time with this recording trying to make it a better version of that live recording, and frankly failing miserably. And I've given you a little bit of the score I used, and it shows where the edits are. We're going to start down basically at measure 37, and I'll go through the score with you as it plays. Same section. I'm going to try and stop it, but I'm faster. So I can't listen to that version of Omanium. And it's funny to me, a lot of people love it. It sells very well. But there's so much about it that we didn't capture the amazing chemistry of that live performance that we did one Sunday afternoon in November in 2005. And so there's the danger. And I had something in my head that I wanted, and I could not, no matter how hard I engineered it, I could not make it happen. And so it's a quick exploration of the ideas of recording. But as Jeremy Dent says, and here's the danger, and this is the danger you always have to keep track of, these edited, perfected performances they're not live. They're manufactured artifacts from which the essential spectacle of human effort has been clipped away. And sometimes it's the human effort that makes something so special. That said, we can't just release a bunch of live recordings. That would be like, we're all carrying around these recording devices in our back pockets, and we can't just do that. But we have to be really careful about what the product is that we're wanting to present and what philosophy we're going to follow. Are we going to go as close to live as possible? Are we going to engineer and make it known we're engineering? Are we going to engineer and pretend we didn't? What are we going to do? And so when you finally decided what philosophy you're going to use, you finally decided what you're going to record, you've decided how you're going to record it, you get eventually, no matter what you do, you get into a booth and you do some mixing and editing. Even with a live performance, you do go back into the booth and you work with your engineer to do stuff. And I cannot stress enough how important it is to listen to your final product on as many sound systems as possible before you release it. It may sound great in your sound booth, but it also needs to sound great through earbuds. It needs to sound great on computer speakers. It needs to sound great in a car. On the debut album, there was a high-pitched whine on some sound systems that wasn't heard in the studio at all. So had I not gone and listened to it on a million sound systems, half the people listening to our Red album would have a high-pitched whine. And let's face it, in this day and age, most of the people listening to your music are going to be listening through earbuds. And we have to be really cognizant of that fact. And it hurts my sound engineer's feelings when I say, okay, it sounds great in here, but I got to listen to it on earbuds. And they kind of shudder. It's like I've offended them. But it's true. People listen to us on computer speakers and on earbuds. So we need to make sure we sound good there, as well as on these fantastic stereo systems that are live and Memorex. So then we come to the next question. How are people going to get your music? How are you going to make sure they know you've recorded and make your music available? Well, the world has changed a lot. When I first released the debut album, the Red album, in 2005, as I said earlier, iPods didn't exist, MP3 players didn't exist. We had Sony Discman, I think, the possessor of the Walkman, I guess. But there wasn't, digital distribution didn't really exist for practical purposes for us. So I ordered 2,000 physical copies of the Red CD. I still have 950 of them. I've given a lot away, just boxes and boxes of this thing, because about a year after the Red album came out, and right in the middle of producing the ODA album, which was a year later, our distributor said, hey, we're starting to do this digital thing, this iTunes thing. And I said, oh, great, let me do that too. And so, I didn't even know what it was. I just said, well, yeah, more people getting our music, that's great, we'll get paid, right? And yeah, sure. So I signed up for digital distribution, and then suddenly that's all we did. Suddenly the physical product was not being ordered by mail anymore. Certainly we still sell it at concerts. I think it's still important to have physical product, because during intermission, when people love you and they want to take a little bit of you home, they want something in their hands. I can see a day where at the concert there'll just be a link to whatever site you can buy digital on, and you sit there with your little handheld computer, your little iPhone, and you just do a digital download immediately. That day's not here yet. I can see it coming. just like paper books are kind of on their way out in a way, I think physical CD product is also eventually going to be not as important. But currently, I still think it's very important to have something that you can actually hand somebody, that you can send in for grant applications, that you can give to people when you're trying to fundraise. Those things are really important to have. So through the life of the Red Album, the physical product, we've made about $5,250. Digital distribution, about $3,200. The thing cost $13,000 to make. That $5,000 that I raised plus paying the singers, $1,000 each to do it. So as you can see, if you are good at math, I have not made my money back on the Red Album. You don't make money recording. Let me say that again. You don't make money recording. Now, Essentials, released in 2007, I only ordered 1,000 of the physical product because digital was taking off. And so I ordered 1,000 because it was not substantially more expensive than ordering 500, maybe $200, $300 tops. And I thought, yeah, that's worth it to have extras to give away for you know, arts patrons and people that are supporting us. We are doing pretty well on the sales there. Digital distribution on a CD that was released fully 2 years after the Red Album were almost equal. And digital distribution continues to really increase. Every month I get a check from CD Baby, who I'll get to in a sec, who handles my digital distribution. I get $100 to $300 a month in digital distribution, depending on the time of year. It gets bigger at Christmas time. And that's digital, that's single song downloads, that's limited streaming, so it's pennies on the dollar. And with pennies on the dollar, we're accumulating $3,000. Imagine how many people that is listening to our music. That's amazing to me to think of. All right, big question here. And I remember wrestling with this, and I still wrestle with it as I'm working on my should have been choral pop album. I'm thinking, how the hell am I going to get the rights to Proud Mary? Tina Turner, I'm going to have to call Tina Turner probably, although I'll probably have to call somebody else. But you have to buy rights for everything you record unless it is public domain. This is something that's required by law, but it's also required by just the sense of common decency. Mechanical rights means the things you buy to release a CD. So if I have a song on a CD that's less than 5 minutes long, I pay 9.1 cents per song for each one I release. So if I'm going to release 100, it's $9.10. If I'm going to release 500, it's $45.50. That's not that expensive. It's worth paying. But where it gets dicey is how do digital rights fit in with that? Back in the day, they didn't. Harry Fox, you see at the top there, that's who handles most of my licensing, harryfox.com. They have a great song file. You can find almost anything you need there. They didn't have a concept of digital rights when I was releasing Essentials. They hadn't figured it out yet. So what they said was, we'll buy mechanical rights, and then you're certainly not going to sell all of your 1,000 CDs, so your digital rights will be covered by the extra mechanical rights you bought. That's how they handled it then. But now there are digital rights, and you buy your mechanical rights, and then you also are supposed to buy digital rights, and that makes it really hard, because when you order 1,000 copies of your Green Essentials CD, you know you're not going to sell more than 1,000 copies of Daniel Gothrop's Sing Me to Heaven. But if you release something digitally, you don't know how it's going to do. You don't know whether 2 people are going to buy it or 2,000. And so that's the problem that the industry is running into. And every time I look at the question, people have different answers for it. And the best thing I can say is be flexible. You're not going to do it right. There is no complete right or wrong. There are many, many shades of gray here. The easiest way for me to do it is to contact the composer directly and say, here's what I'm doing, how do you want me to handle it? And this is great when the composers are alive. Somebody like Benjamin Britten, you still have to pay rights for him even though he's dead, but he's not answering phone calls anymore, so it's hard to determine how best to handle the rights for something like Benjamin Britten that has an estate. Somebody like Thomas de Luis Victoria, he's dead. He's public domain. So the best way to handle your rights is to do an album of all dead people that don't have estates, and then you don't have to buy rights at all. Everything is in the public domain. What they're working on now is doing rights to limited downloads and interactive streaming. A limited download is something that you download for a certain time or a certain number of plays. So you can either have it for 30 days or you can listen to it 12 times and then it goes away again. It's like a lending in the library. And you have to buy rights as a performer or as a releaser of that piece for that as well. Also, interactive streaming, all of that internet radio, you are technically supposed to buy rights for that. And how I have handled that with Harry Fox so far is I still have not sold all of my CDs, my physical CDs that I bought mechanical rights for each of the 4 CDs I've done. And so I'm still in good stead, because as long as I have CDs left, I probably haven't overshot the rights that I've bought. Somebody like Daniel Gothrop, he doesn't do his rights through Harry Fox, so I called him and he said, here's what we're going to do. You're going to pay me X amount, and it's going to cover everything all the time. So it doesn't matter how many you sell, here's what you owe me. Livy Larson did that with me as well. Stephen Paulus and Stephen Stuckey, they both did that as well. So with them, I'm clear. No matter what happens, no matter how little or how much I sell, I'm clear with them. It's dicey, it's difficult, but that doesn't mean you should not try to do it legally. You should not try to do it with a sense of decency, with a sense of reliability and honesty. Because you're a musician, they're musicians, we should all get paid. Packaging, you're still going to release physical CDs at least for another 5 years, I think. So discmakers.com, I found, is the best way to package your CD. It's very affordable. They do beautiful work. They will take your art that you have designed, and they have wonderful templates for your graphic designers to work with right on discmakers.com. They will also, for a fee, design it for you. And I've not used that service from them, but I've heard it's fantastic. They have right now they have two kinds of packaging. The Digipack you can see on the screen right now. I think the one that's showing is probably a 8-panel Digipack, because there's panels on each side of that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe it's a 6-panel. And so you've got space for program notes, you've got space for the CD, there can be art under that CD. The CD itself can have art on it, it folds, so you've got a cover and a back. And it's a really nice, good-looking product, and you don't have to pay that much. $1,000 for 1,000, or $1,100 for the 6-panel is not that much. Or you can go even cheaper and impress people with your ability to be green by doing these little eco wallets. And again, they give you the template for the design, and you tell them what you want, or they can help you with that. And the eco wallets you can get out of there a little bit cheaper. It's great packaging, and what Disc Makers also does that is phenomenal is they tie you up with CD Baby. So when you buy your physical packaging from Disc Makers, if you pay an extra $59, just $59, they set you up with what they call the Mega Distribution Bundle. And so what they do is they hook you up with CD Baby. And CD Baby handles everything from there on out. They handle getting your CD listed on that Grace Note service, where no matter who it is puts your CD in the system, and it tells them what's on the CD and who wrote it and who recorded it and what album it's from. So if you don't do that, then somebody puts your CD in and it says track 1, track 2, track 3, and it looks unprofessional. But if Grace Notes pops up, suddenly you're professional. Suddenly you know what you're doing. If somebody can search you on iTunes and find you, suddenly you know what you're doing. If they can find you on Amazon, if they can find you on allmusic.com, which is this new fantastic encyclopedic music site. It's amazing. You should look at it if you haven't. Suddenly that gives you a reputation of being more famous than you are. If you're on iTunes, that's pretty amazing. And if you are, when you type, it might not be true, I haven't checked for a while, but if you type "Sing Me to Heaven" in the title, in the search bar of iTunes, I think Octarium's recording of is the first one that pops up. And that's pretty awesome, because that's a famous song. And so, anybody who looks for "Sing Me to Heaven" finds our recording. And that makes me really, really happy to know that all over the world people can find our recordings. What iTunes doesn't do very well, what Amazon doesn't do very well, for classical music particularly, is make the composer searchable. So if you're looking, say, for O Magnum Mysterium by Lauridsen, you type in O Magnum Mysterium Lauridsen and you get all the O Magnum Mysteriums. There isn't really a place in iTunes as of yet to put composer and put to make the search engine work a little bit better for classical music. So it's almost impossible to find our O Magnum Mysterium by Lauridsen from the ODA album. But you can find "Sing Me to Heaven" almost immediately. So CD Baby does really, really great stuff. They don't take very much money from you. They have all of these wonderful apps, so they can set you up with a music app that you can sell your music directly off of Facebook. They actually physically have your CDs in their warehouses in Oregon, and they sell it to distribution places across the country. I remember I walked into a gift shop in a small museum in Iowa one time, and there was an Octarium CD. And I thought, well, how the hell did you guys get this? And they got it through a one-stop distribution place that CD Baby had sold to. And so your music gets everywhere. And you don't really even know where it's going. CD Baby has reports, but you don't have to think about it. You can just trust that your music is all over the place. And one of my favorite stories is after the tsunami in Japan, About 3 months later, I got sales. It takes about 3 months for sales to get from CD Baby to me, or from iTunes to CD Baby to me. And I got a really big check about 3 months after the tsunami, and I thought, what the heck? Why is this check so much bigger than it usually is? So I got on CD Baby, and I looked, and iTunes Japan had exploded, and everybody in Japan, it seems, had bought a copy of Sing Me to Heaven after that tsunami. And I use that all the time in grant reports, because that is a really good example of how music can touch people and how music can help people and change people. And it's also proof that there's no need for a label these days. When we came out with the Red Album in 2005, everybody said, you got to send this off. You got to send this to Naxos. You got to send it to Nimbus. You got to send it to everybody. You need a label. You need representation. But you really don't these days. Labels don't really pay for recordings anymore. They might kick in some money, but it's usually the artist that foots the bill for most of it. They're just there to help you distribute. But honestly, do you need it? I mean, you need them to get a Grammy. These self-produced albums are never going to get a Grammy. They're never going to win those shiny awards. But more people can hear your music now through outlets like CD Baby than ever thought possible in 2005 when I first released that Red Album. And you think about it, back in the olden days, in the 50s, you released a record and then you had to find a way to get that record into people's hands. Now you release something and boom, it's out there. It's in the cloud. It's everywhere. And the possibilities are endless. So that is my presentation for tonight. I covered lots of things and I didn't do a lot of detail. The problem with hitting detail is that it changes, particularly with distribution. Next year, if I do this again, things will have changed drastically, and there will be, somebody will have decided how to do digital rights, and there'll be a system in place. And things are going to continue to change as technology continues to morph and make some things easier and some things harder. So I think that the thing to take away most from this webinar is to know that what you learn is always going to change. And what you did for this CD a year ago is not going to be the exact same thing that you would do for a CD 2 years from now. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Krista.
Thank you.
Really, really interesting stuff. I love the story about the stumbling upon the Actarium CD in the middle of Iowa. That's the 21st century for you right there.
Absolutely.
Well, we have a number of questions that have come in, so we'll have a few minutes to get to those. And
okay.
I just want to remind people, if you do have a question you'd like to ask, go ahead and write it into the question box on your control panel. That's probably the quickest way to see if we can get some of these answered. So let me go to our first question here, which is when you were talking about recording the pop album. The question says, why does the fact that the repertoire is pop drive the recording process or procedure? Why not do it as if it were a true quote-unquote choral recording?
That's a good question, and I think it's a question of personal taste and personal choice. When we do our Should Have Been choral concerts, we do them unamplified, so we do them just chorally, and I have a lot of recordings, live recordings of us doing that. But I made a choice to make this as close to what's happening on TV right now, all that Glee, all those TV shows about choral music. I made a choice to go more towards that than towards typical choral recordings. It's a choice. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's just the choice I've made. And I do think something will be lost in the process that I'm doing it that way. But I think it will because of some of the things we're doing are classical, it'll change the way people listen to classical music. And the reason I do the Should Have Been choral concerts are I go into schools and have kids listen to music differently. And so we do the Barbara Seville Overture for this educational outreach thing, and I divide the kids up, and they are the minor chord that goes bum 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 da 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 da, and suddenly they hear that chord. Whereas when they first listened to it, they just heard the melody. So suddenly they hear the chord, and then they go out and they listen to their Lady Gaga or their Rihanna or whoever the hell they're listening to these days, and they hear it differently. They hear more than the melody. And so I wanted the Should Have Been choral recording to be as clean as possible so that you could really hear what the voices were covering and how they were functioning.
Very cool. All right, our next question is, how do you envision the future of recording for classical music? One thing you were kind of touching on a little bit. more live or more studio?
Oh, I think it's going to be a combination of both. I fear that our audiences are not going to accept live recordings with flaws for much longer. They're going to want everything they hear to be perfect because there's the possibility that it can be perfect. So I think we're going to lose in the process at some point the joy of live recording, because I think although we'll make them, I don't think people will purchase them as often. If I were predicting the future, I would predict that live recordings would still be made, but that the business side of it will be driven by more studio engineered recordings. But that's a guess. I'm not really sure.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple sort of more things on the comment end that have been written in, and I guess we can just see what your response would be to these. So the first one says, a recording is much different from a performance, when you were kind of talking about that distinction in Jeremy Dink's article. And it says a recording is its own separate art form. And the same person followed that with, recordings are a board-supported activity, so engage the board and then fund the recording beforehand. And they said, you're right, recordings are not really a revenue stream.
Mm-hmm. That's true. No, you will never ever make money recording. It's the use of recording is to preserve the work you're doing for posterity. It's to allow your fans to take a little bit of you home with them, but you're never ever going to make money. I mean, eventually, 25 years from now, I think the Red Album will have made something. But certainly, you know, I'm in debt because of the 5 recordings I've done. Not technically, but I spent more on them than I'll ever make. And yes, recording is its own separate art form. But I do think that most people purchasing recordings as lay people don't think of them that way. They think of what they've just seen on stage. That's what they're going to capture in the CD. So they want it to be as close as possible to what they just heard. And what we have to be really careful of is don't put out a recording that you couldn't get close to in live performance. That you just can't. You can't have something perfect on a CD that you could never get even close to live. So you've got to be really careful with how much you engineer and how much you manipulate, because you've got to be able to do it for real.
Great, great. We'll probably have time for one more question, and I want to get to something that at least one person wrote in asking, and I'm going to sort of modify a little bit something I was thinking about as well, because, you know, I have questions too. And just about, you know, you mentioned funding the recordings a little bit, and you know, if you wanted to go into any kind of detail about, you know, ways you'd recommend funding them, but and my question is, you know, with crowdfunding these days, with things like Kickstarter, you know, I think we're all seeing a lot of our friends and colleagues, you know, starting projects on these crowdfunding sites, and then everyone's asking us for donations for them, you know, to do their recording projects oftentimes. What are your thoughts on that? Just curious.
I haven't used crowdfunding for recording. I used it with great success for the Art Local concert, the composer initiative that we just did in March. And what I love about crowdfunding is it allows people to give to you in small amounts and still know they're really, really giving something to you that you're going to be able to use. One of my big speeches as a nonprofit executive director, so to speak, is that people won't give me money if they don't feel like they can give me enough. But if enough people give me $5, I still have the same amount of money. And so that's what crowdfunding allows you to do. It also allows people to feel like they're on the ground floor of an exciting project. So I'm probably going to crowdfund this pop CD we're working on, because what I can do is create a video with some of these sound files I have and some video of them recording, and people will feel close to the process and excited about it, and then we'll probably be able to raise $5,000 much easier than I could raise if I went to lunch with a lot of rich people and asked them to pay for something that they're never going to really see a return on. Raising money for recordings is difficult unless you want to put a lot of sponsors on the outside of your CD, and most people don't want to do that. My funding has been very creative. What I usually do is I have lots of grants that cover things like my salary as an artistic director, and so I take that salary and then I donate it back and I record with that salary. So I pay myself and then I give it back. And so because a lot of the arts granting mechanisms don't want to fund recordings, and so they, you know, the Missouri Arts Council knows I do that. I'm very transparent about it. And it's my choice to take a salary that has been granted by Missouri Arts Council and donate it back. I've also asked my singers to work for free more often than I want to in the realm of recording. They have not been paid for essentials or for modern masters yet, so I still owe them money for those too. They're never expecting to be paid, but I fully expect someday. We might all be 75 and in the nursing home, but someday I'm going to pay them for that because that's only fair and right. But they went into the project knowing that I did not have the money to pay them, and they were okay with that because they care enough to create this product that's going to be lasting for them as well for the people that listen to them. So funding recordings is dicey, and there are not a lot of funding opportunities out there that help you with that, but crowdsourcing and Kickstarter, I think, are the best things going for recording right now.